This is Science 8 2017-2018 recording on the Grand Canyon. To be successful on this summative, you need to have two things. The first thing that you need to have is a copy of this article. If you do not have a copy of this article, it is also in your science book on page 234. Please turn to it now. The second thing that you will need to have is a graphic organizer. It looks like this. The name of this graphic organizer is called Unit Summative Project on Earth's Dynamic Systems. Please put your name at the top of the page along with the hour that you have science. Directions. The goal of this summative is to show how geological processes have shaped your geologic feature or landform. You will get 2 class periods to complete this summative. On day 1, you will complete the graphic organizer below with information about your assigned geologic feature. You will do this by researching your geologic feature using reliable and reputable websites. This is due Friday at the start of class. To start, you need to name your landform. Your landform is the Grand Canyon. When we start to read, we need to figure out the location of the Grand Canyon. I will stop when we find that in the reading. Imagine what the land you lived on looked like millions of years ago. The land wouldn't have had houses and schools and shopping malls on it. Back then, it might have just been grassland as far as the eye could see. It's also possible that the land where you are standing was once underwater. Millions of years ago, much of what we know as the western United States was still part of the Pacific Ocean. But the forces that shaped our world are strong, so the land began to change. First, land started to rise above the sea level. A great mountain range called the Rocky Mountains formed and the ocean got smaller. A river also formed that flowed from high up in the mountains down to lower land. It was named Rio Colorado, which means the Red River in Spanish. Some of the land we recognize today was shaped by these changes, but the story doesn't end there. The Grand Canyon is one of America's most famous landmarks. It is located in Arizona, which is part of the Southwest United States. So there's your first pieces of information, that the Grand Canyon is actually located in Arizona, which is in the Southwest United States. So right here on your worksheet where it says location, in a complete sentence, in your own words, you need to find out or write the location of the Grand Canyon. If you have trouble with the spelling of Arizona or Southwest United States, please look at your reading and where I underlined, and write it where the red X's are. So next we are going to skip the statement for a minute, and we are going to go to formation using 3 key terms. And what that basically means is, what are the steps in making the Grand Canyon as we see it today? And so we will need to continue reading to find out that answer. Today we would describe the region hot and dry. The climate is arid. The Grand Canyon's layers show nearly 2 billion years of Earth's history. The oldest rocks are at the bottom of the canyon, which are metamorphic and igneous. They tell us that there had once been a lot of heat and pressure deep below the ground. The top layers of the canyon are younger, sedimentary rock. These rocks formed millions of years ago when sea levels rose and fell. Geologists have found fossils of trilobites and brachiopods in the upper layers of the canyon. One trilobite could leave multiple fossils because it would shed its exoskeleton as it grew. The exoskeletons would become trapped in the sedimentary rock layers. So how did this canyon form and get so big? The area where the canyon exists is part of a larger landmass called the Colorado Plateau. About 17 million years ago, the land began to rise. Eventually, the plateau rose high enough to come into contact with the river. The river began carving a canal into the land 5 to 6 million years ago. So how did this canyon form and get so big? The area where the canyon exists is part of a larger landmass called the Colorado Plateau. About 17 million years ago, the land began to rise. Eventually, the plateau rose high enough to come into contact with the river. The river began carving a channel into the land 5 to 6 million years ago. The name for the process that created the Grand Canyon is erosion. Erosion is the movement of soil, rock, or rock fragments from one place to another by water or wind. Water moving along and carrying pieces of rock explain how a long, narrow trench 1 mile deep would form, but there are edges of the rock wall that are up to 18 miles apart. The explanation of the Grand Canyon's great width is still that it is due to water, but not that of just one river. There are small rivers around the plateau that flow into the larger Colorado River. The smaller rivers are called tributes. The largest tributes are the Green River and the San Juan River. These, among many small rivers, erode more land than just the channel that the Colorado River cut. Wind, heavy rain, and the strength of the river continue to wear away rock. Water is also Wind, heavy rain, and the strength of the river continue to wear away rock. Water is always moving, even when it looks calm. As long as the river runs through the canal, the slower erosion will continue. Wind, heavy rain, and the strength of the river continue to wear away rock. Water is always moving, even when it looks calm. As long as the river runs through the canyon, the slow erosion will continue. We don't see the canyon change much day to day or year to year, but it could look different thousands of years from now. So the section that we are filling out again is how it was formed, or what are the steps in how the Grand Canyon was made. So let's talk about the first step. So let's talk about the first step. So right here is the first step. And we know that the great mountain range called the Rocky Mountains were formed. And what we know about that and how we know the Grand Canyon is part of that is because at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, the rocks are igneous, which we're talking about volcanic rocks, and metamorphic. Which that means that those rocks have a lot of pressure and a lot of heat. So we know that the Grand Canyon is part of all of this because at the bottom of that canyon there are igneous and metamorphic rocks. So right here you are going to describe the first step in the creation of the Grand Canyon and the fact that the Rocky Mountains were formed, and we know that that was part of the Grand Canyon because at the bottom of the Grand Canyon there's igneous and metamorphic rock, and igneous rock is volcanic rock. So in complete sentences, I need you to write that information down in that box. So first let's talk about the first step of the Grand Canyon. And we're going to write the first step right here in a complete sentence in your own words. So what happened? Okay guys, so we need to list the steps in the formation or the making of the Grand Canyon. So let's look for the first step of the Grand Canyon. So the first step is right here. We know for a fact that this area, Arizona, was actually underneath the ocean. It was part of the Pacific Ocean. And we know that Arizona was underneath water, underneath the ocean, because in the Grand Canyon, we have found fossils and we have found sedimentary rock. So right here, sedimentary rock, and we found fossils. So that's why we know that the Grand Canyon was underwater. So right here, I need you to write about the land that was going to become the Grand Canyon was under the Pacific Ocean. And we know it was underneath the Pacific Ocean, right? Because in the Grand Canyon, we have seen fossils and we have seen sedimentary rock. And that is only forms around water. So I need you to write in a complete sentence in your own words in that blank. So then the second step is right here. So you had uplifting. So a great mountain range called the Rocky Mountains formed and the ocean got smaller. So we know that this area came up out of the sea because of convergent boundaries. That those two boundaries hit and went up. And that's how the Grand Canyon, or the land around the Grand Canyon, came up out of the water. And the reason why we know this is that if you go down here, you'll notice that it says that the oldest rocks are at the bottom of the canyon are metamorphic and igneous rock. And we know that igneous rock is volcanic rock. And we know that metamorphic rocks are created with heat and pressure. Okay? So in a complete sentence, right here in step 2, you need to write in complete sentences in your own words what happened in the second step of how the Grand Canyon was made. And remember, it was underwater. This area was underwater. And then you have convergent boundaries that hit and came up and caused the Rocky Mountains. And we know that this went up with the Rocky Mountains because at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you can find metamorphic rock and you can find igneous rock. If you have any trouble spelling any of these words, please go back to your article. I've spelled all these words out in red and circled them. But right now I need you to write in complete sentences what happened on the second step of the Grand Canyon. Okay, the next step is right here. The third step is right here. So the river began to carve a channel into the land 5 to 6 million years ago. The name of the process that created the Grand Canyon is erosion. So basically on step 3, what happens is You have this plateau, and a river is going through it, and it's slowly carving like a hole through there. So what's happening on step 3 is you have this plateau or this land area, and you have a river that's going through it, and it's slowly digging basically a really shallow channel through there, like a little hole that goes through there. So in complete sentences, I need you to write right here in your own words what's happening. The fact that there is this river that is going through the plateau and it's making a little channel or a little hole is starting to carve in it. And that's because of water erosion. So you have that water breaking down all the little pieces of rock and soil that's in that plateau, and the water is not only breaking it into small pieces, but it's also eroding it, or it's carrying those little pieces down the river. And so it's starting to slowly carve just a little hole there. So please put that in your own words. So for step 4 of the making of the Grand Canyon, what happens is over millions and millions and millions of years ago, that river keeps cutting, keeps making that hole bigger and bigger and bigger and deeper and deeper and deeper because it's carrying, it's breaking down those little pieces of rock and carrying those pieces of rock away. And so that hole, that canyon, is getting deeper and deeper and deeper. So in your own words, please put that right here in complete sentences. So for step 5 in the future, what's going to happen is it's just going to continue to get even deeper and deeper. So this canyon is going to get farther and farther down and get deeper and deeper because that stream is doing a lot of weathering and eroding and taking those pieces of soil and rock and taking them elsewhere. So in your own words, please put that here. So now let's go back to the statement. And the first thing I need you to write here is the Grand Canyon. So the Grand Canyon was formed as a result of convergent boundaries and then there was weathering, and then there was water erosion. So the next section that I want to talk about is defining your 3 key terms. There are a lot of words that you can use here. You can use erosion or fossil record or igneous rock or fossil or tectonic plates or sedimentary rocks or metamorphic rocks or water erosion or weathering. You are going to pick 3 of those and you're going to define them in a complete sentence in your own words. Written description of appearance. So in this section, what you are going to do is you are going to write what it looked like. So for example, where it says, in the beginning, it looked like. So what you are going to do is write a complete sentence about what I'm describing. So for example, at the beginning, the Grand Canyon was underneath water. So you are going to write about that, about how the Grand Canyon was under the Pacific Ocean. Please write that in a complete sentence right now. Then it changed and looked like. And so what you are going to do is talk about how it rose from the water and became a plateau with a river that went through it that started to slowly carve out a little channel. So it started to not only use that water to weather the rocks into little pieces of rock, but also to erode it and move it, the rocks down and away from the Grand Canyon. And so it has a little hole or a little channel there. So in a complete sentence, I want you to write about that. So then today it looks like, so today it looks a lot different. So the Grand Canyon is a lot steeper and deeper than it was millions of years ago. And that's because there is a river that still goes through there and is still slowly weathering and eroding that area. But now the Grand Canyon is just a lot deeper after millions of years. So in a complete sentence, I want you to talk about that, about how that river has weathered and eroded the canyon so that the canyon is really deep now. So in the future, it will look like. So in the future, what's going to happen is that Grand Canyon is going to be even deeper than it is now because that river is still running through the Grand Canyon and it's still breaking down those rocks and weathering them and carrying those rocks away and called erosion. And so that Grand Canyon is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper millions of years in the future. So I need you to write in a complete sentence about how the Grand Canyon is going to get deeper because the river is still weathering and eroding the Grand Canyon away. This is the end of the recording.